Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Solar Opposites. Okay, so it's a new season of Solar Opposites, and this is where I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about something. Those of you who know, who have kind of followed me for a while now, or have followed the show in general for a while now, know that it was co-created by Justin Roiland, the co-creator of Rick and Morty, and also more specifically a company, a game development studio that he founded, but he also created High on Life, which is a fun little shooter game. I've been playing that. I've been having a fun time 100%ing that for you guys. But in case I want to tell the story because it is kind of important for the series going forward. So those of you who do not know, Justin Roiland was outed as being a horrible person late last year. Essentially what happened was he got sued and he was sued and charged for, I believe, actually charged is probably the better word, but he got charged with domestic assault and false imprisonment, which is obviously not great. And while he has since been acquitted of that, this caused a lot of other bad stories about him to finally surface and reveal that he, which in general isn't a good person. It was revealed by many co-workers in an article that you can read. I will have to find it and post it in the video, post in the video description. But essentially, there's an article you can read about all of the borderline inappropriate things that he's done in the workplace while working on Rick and Morty, the sister series to Solar Opposites. He had been, and just all the borderline disruptive things that he's done over on Rick and Morty, which obviously working on Rick and, that's obviously not something you should be doing in a workplace. Obviously, that made it very hard for the rest of anybody to work on Rick and Morty. He essentially what the story goes is that he stopped coming in to write episodes around season 2. And going forward, he was just obnoxious and difficult to work with, and he would almost never come into the office in person. And when it was, he would obviously be a bit of a mess. He would obviously just disrupt a bunch of people. And then I'm not entirely sure how valid this is, but there's also claims that he diddled kids. But I'm not entirely sure how valid that is. But it's probably something somebody made up because I have no idea. I have no idea if that's true or not. To do your own research, I have no idea. But essentially, this is the case. Long story short, Justin Roiland was outed as a horrible person, and in response to that, he got every single current project he was working on taken away from him, including Solar Opposites, Rick and Morty, High on Life, Koala Man, couple of other things he's done, and he will most likely. And if he's voiced a favorite character of yours, he will most likely not be coming back to voice that character in the foreseeable future. So, yeah, unfortunately, Justin Roiland has just kind of been outed as a lot of things. So unfortunately, he's not really able to work on anything anymore. But I guess I bring this all up because obviously a lot of the shows that he worked on have since tried to bounce back from that. Obviously, he's for example. For example, High on Life, which I'm currently playing, the most recent episode. This should have gone up by the time well before this one, but if I've done it correctly. But essentially, High on Life is developing a new DLC without him that is promoting first and foremost, it's promoting Knifey, one of the other characters in the game that isn't voiced by Justin Roiland, and it's making him the prominent main character of the DLC, which is a great place to go because obviously if you're playing through the DLC, you'll know that if you're played the game, you'll know that that the guns just happen to talk to you and Justin Roiland happens to voice the main one that you're meant to use. Essentially the premise is that it's a Igavania first-person shooter mashup thing. It's fun. I'm enjoying it. I'm just pointing out, just restating things I've said over on those videos about how Justin Roiland was fired from that. That's what they decided to do with that. They decided to promote Rick and they decided to kind of promote the idea of that of that, you know, Knifey's going to be the new main character for the DLC. They're going to add new areas and new guns so they can kind of get away from having Justin Roiland voice some things. And overall, that's what they're planning to do. And then over on Rick and Morty is a different kind of show from Solar Opposites. I like Rick and Morty, but essentially what Rick and Morty is, every season has a theme with an overarching narrative of why is Rick a horrible person and what caused him to become so jaded and be such a cosmic nihilist. Why does he think that? Why is he constantly promoting this ideology of nothing matters, so don't give a shit about anything. That's essentially Rick's entire ideology and why he behaves the way he does. And he's progressively become a little bit less of a nihilistic ass as the series has gone on. By season 6, he started actively taking a role in his family's lives. That's where season 6 has left him. That is where he's going for season 7 and obviously Rick and Morty. And obviously he was the main voice of both Rick and Morty, which obviously means that that Adult Swim can't really promote him as a thing anymore, because obviously he's not involved in the show anymore. He voices the two main characters, so they're obviously having a bit of difficulty replacing him and all of the other ancillary characters that he voiced, all the little minor characters that just pop up here and there within that series. But essentially the way they've decided to work around that in that series is they've decided. Well, first and foremost, there's a Rick and Morty anime that's being made, which does work around the whole Justin Roiland problem by introducing. But obviously, Rick and Morty has done an anime adaptation of itself before. They've done 2 little specials on the Adult Swim channel where Justin Roiland didn't voice Rick or Morty in those. And now they're decided to double down on that by making a new spin-off season that is entirely set within the anime continuity of that. They're making an anime series where Justin Roiland did not voice Rick and Morty in that. He has never voiced Rick and Morty in that. He is never going to voice Rick and Morty in that. And then the main series Rick and Morty is promoting Rick's character growth and the story so far as the thing that they're going to be doing for that series, because obviously if you're like 6-7 seasons into Rick and Morty, you're probably there for the characters and not so much for who voices them. But let's be perfectly honest. If you're like 7 seasons in at this point and you're invested in the stories of the characters and what the series has to say, you're probably not going to care about the fact that Rick and Morty sound a little bit off. And honestly, I'm looking forward to season 7 because, you know, I'm expecting Rick and Morty to sound a little bit different, but, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing how that story plays out. And then over here on Solar Opposites, which has more of an irreverent, not really having a very strict continuity or anything at all kind of thing, decided that the best way to replace Justin Roiland was to not even bother trying. Which brings us directly to the review of this. So, because all of that was important preface for the first scene of this entire series. Of this entire season. So, this season opens up with Terry buying the lawn dart board from Cheers. And of course Jesse and Yumulak are a little concerned, especially pointing out that Corvo previously told him no sharp metal things in the house. But of course, Terry doesn't listen, insisting that they're famous darts and that Corvo won't even know what Corvo doesn't know won't hurt him. At which point he hangs it up and gets ready to throw a dart, and he accidentally nails Corvo right in the throat. And of course, this causes Corvo's vocal cords to obviously become irreparably damaged. So Terry has the replicants go upstairs to grab what they call a voice fixing ray, and they bring it downstairs and they fix Corvo's vocal cords. And from this point onward, and this is a really funny little gag that, as far as I know, persists for the rest of the season. From this point onward, Corvo is voiced by Dan Stevens, who is British, has a British accent, and speaks it, and obviously, and for the rest of the and for, as far as I know, for the rest of the series going forward, this is just going to be Corvo's voice now. He is now British. That is all you need to know about the preface of this. He is British now. literally did not even bother trying to replicate Justin Roiland's Corvo voice. They just got a new guy to do his own voice. And that the end result is that Corvo is now British. And of course, Terry is admittedly a little turned on about the idea that Corvo has a British voice now. And they then proceed to go to work. They then proceed to leave and get into the car and get ready to go to work. While the replicants kind of comment on the fact that Corvo sounds a little bit off and wonders if they should be worried about that. But Yamalak points out that nobody is probably going to notice and that he sounds exactly the same to him. And then they leave, and the pupa then proceeds to lock eyes with the camera, acknowledging that this is a new voice. We're going to be doing a new voice, and doubling down on that. And then doubling down on that, they redo the intro. They redo the intro with the new voice. And obviously, and then Corvo then proceeds to end the intro by saying, "Fuck you, this is my voice now. This is what I'm gonna sound like going forward." And also there was like tachyons or whatever in the ray. So this is what I'm gonna sound like in flashbacks too. So essentially they just retcon the idea that Corvo ever sounded like Justin Roiland. They essentially just retconned all of that out and just made Corvo British going forward, which is funny. It works with the comedy of the show. I like the idea. I love what they're going forward with it. But in case this is this point where we should probably talk about what the series is, and the episode opens up. The episode then proceeds to open up after the cold open with a fake out. Obviously, it starts with how every other season before this has started, with Corvo claiming that he's fixed the ship finally. Obviously Corvo sits down with the rest of the crew, and he's currently lamenting on the fact that it took a lot longer than he was expecting, because obviously he had to fix it on weekends when he wasn't working at what we later find at the job we are about to find out what he has. But in case he sits down with it, he sits down and just sits down and explains that it was worth it, but also points out that now they no longer have to do their boring dead-end office job, so that they can just, keep going forward with the story. We keep going forward, because now the pupa has had some structure in his life, and admit that it was all worth it to give the pupa some structure in his life, so that he didn't, transform into a horrible thing and develop more teen angst again. And of course, the pupa then proceeds to give out half-baked sentences, which of course Corvo points out is just the way he likes it. At which point they to kind of celebrate the fact that he fixed the ship. The rest of his team proceeds to gift him a V-neck, which he didn't ever think he would be able to pull off, but Terry reassures him that he should try it on, and of course they point out that it does look good on him. At which point he gets ready to take off and fly off as everybody chants his name, and of course we find out it's a fake out. What we find out is that Corvo fell asleep at his job, and his boss is currently trying to wake him up by calling his name. And of course Corvo immediately snaps awake and realizes that his boss was in the middle of a meeting, but then we find out that actually Corvo was in the middle of a presentation. And which is not great. He fell asleep when he was supposed to be presenting something. And what we find out in this scene is that not only do Terry and Corvo work at a rake company called Davenport Rakes, which is fun, but of course we find out that their boss, Mr. Servans, he is currently worried about global warming. He's currently worried about the fact that rakes are going to become inefficient. Because obviously he believes that obviously global warming means that leaves are probably less likely to fall off during fall and winter and all the other seasons when you would use a rake. So and of course he asked Corvo to give a presentation on that, and Corvo confirms that his worst fears have been realized. The leaves are becoming a lot less likely to fall off their trees now, which of course causes a lot of concern amongst the company. And of course Mr. Servants reveals that if things continue in this way, he will have to downsize their branch, which is not great. So, but in case the episode then continues onward with the next morning, where Corvo is currently making a bagged lunch for the replicants. And he's also pointing out that, and he's also pointing out that everything in for the time being has to be kept normal as well. This essentially what was established at the end of last season. Sci-fi needs to be kept to a minimum in the series going forward because it doesn't give the pupa structure. The entire reason they got a job and started committing to school is because it provides structure for the pupa to grow and be nurtured, and continue to the next phase of its development, which will inevitably happen at the end of the season, like it does at the end of every season so far. Which of course the pupa is currently sitting in the floor of the kitchen, just playing with its little what is it? One of those little square hole toys. That's just a little box with a little cube with holes in it that you're supposed to put the little shaped pieces in. One of those, you know what I'm talking about. There's a very famous TikTok of that. You guys know what I'm talking about. But in case he sits down, he explains all of this, but in case he continues to explain how they need to keep everything normal, bit of a normal structure, which of course he yells at Terry that pointing out that they need to keep some sort of structure, which means they have to keep going to the job. While Yumulak and Jesse are annoyed that they have such run-of-the-mill lunches, but he tells them that again they need to keep structure because they're reminding everybody. Reminding the replicants and by extension everybody what happened at the end of last season. People turned into a giant fog cloud and started summoning a bunch of teen angst monsters. Obviously they don't want that to happen again because that was gross and weird. So they decide to suck it up and continue going on with their lives. Meanwhile, and of course, this is this point where the episodes then proceed to break into an A plot and a B plot. So I will go over both of those. So first and foremost, let's start with the A plot. Corvo and Terry arrive at their office and are obviously very frustrated. Corvo keeps getting emails to change his password when Corvo points out that he has a very complicated password that nobody will ever guess. I forget the exact password, but we do find out that the password is not great. And meanwhile, Terry laments that his coworker keeps telling him the same exact joke every single day, which he's starting to not appreciate. But after he explains it to Corvo starts to realize that it's not so much a joke and more so that one of their coworkers is venting about how her now late husband was killed in a hit and run, which. Yeah, not great. Yeah, Terry doesn't really know how to read the room sometimes. I will be perfectly honest. But and this is definitely one of those instances of that. And of course, Corvo decide to leave for their lunch break and come back. They admit that they don't really want to work at the job anymore. They don't really want to work in the job anymore. Case in point, when they do eventually get back from their lunch break, and also Terry proceeds to press all the elevator buttons so that they don't have to go back. Which, of course, annoys Corvo, but Terry points out that it's so that they specifically take as long as possible to get back to their job. He doesn't want to go work there anymore. He feels like it's boring and there's not enough morale there. So, of course, as they leave, and this is the title thing of the episode, as they're on their way up and the elevator's obviously opening all of the door floors as they go up, they see a completely different office for AT&T call center. And what we find out is that the AT&T call center on one of the lower floors has a ping pong table. And Terry and Corvo, obviously, being Scorpions, do not know what ping pong is. They just think it's the coolest thing ever. And then when they realize that their boss bought them the table, and then it obviously takes a lot of the stress out of working there because obviously it's an AT&T call center. It's a very boring and slow job where sometimes you pick up a call, sometimes you don't. But it works in this situation because obviously they have a lot of downtime in between calls, which means they are just playing ping pong in the office. And of course, this is this one where Terry and Corvo realize how they can finally fix their problem. They immediately go to their boss, Mr. Servants, and demand a ping pong table. That's essentially it. That's essentially the premise of the episode of the A plot of the episode. They go to their boss and demand a ping pong table, and of course he's visibly annoyed because obviously he points out that a ping pong table would be impracticable. And of course, Sarah and Corvo do proceed to propose their entire idea. idea about how they've already measured out his space in the boiler room and how it would fit there perfectly. And they pointed out that would be exactly where they put it. But of course, Mr. Servants points out the obvious problem that first and foremost, they shouldn't have been down in the boiler room. He points out that the boiler room is extremely dangerous and that they could die or get hurt or whatever. And of course, this is foreshadowing. We'll get to that. But he gets to that. But of course, he also explains that they also interrupted an important call, and also points out the obvious problem that a ping pong table would just be disruptive, and that putting one in would be a problem. And also specifically points out that they can't really put one in. That would be a problem for a number of reasons. It would just be disruptive. It's in a bad place where people could get hurt. For a number of reasons, he vetoes it. But among those is that Terry and Corvo are currently the only people in the entire office who want one. So he points that out to them. And of course this causes Terry and Corvo to become annoyed. And they proceed to go back home to the ship to scheme up to go to the Pretendo deck and scheme up an idea. And they go into this room that they use for when they're scheming things, and where they just smoke and exercise and things like that while they think of things. And as they discuss it, they finally realize how they can work around Mr. Servants' logic. They realize that if they get more people to agree to the ping pong table and agree to it being put in, that they can potentially get the ping pong table installed, and it won't be a problem. So with that, he realized that the best way to do that is to ask some of their more, well, so shall we say, less intelligent people, or people that they can more easily manipulate, to agree to put in the ping pong table. And there's a very fun joke, and there's also a very fun joke from The Office where there's a Pam and Jim stand-in, which is funny. But essentially, they just go down their list of people to buy them off and convince them to sign it, and also tell all their friends to sign it as well. And this winds up working. They go down the list, including a funny thing where their one coworker finally gives revenge on the guy who ran her husband over, which is fun. But it's funny, but also kind of dark. But I'll admit that she straight up murders a dude. I'll be honest, she straight up murders the dude who murdered her husband. So, but eventually they do wind up getting a list of people and a petition to put in a ping pong table. And they bring it to Mr. Servants and proceed to tell him that they have finally found a hole in his logic, which is that nobody wanted a ping pong table. Now they have written proof that everybody wants one. But Mr. Servants, once again, points out that no, he's not going to buy them a ping pong table. And of course he insists why not, when of course they insist why not, pointing out that they've debunked his logic. He then proceeds to point out that there's a much bigger reason that they're not seeing, and he proceeds to tell them the reason they can't put in a ping pong table is because they're going to be audited by the board of directors in a couple of days, and that of course means that they need to cut costs. He's already explained that they need to cut costs and they need to do layoffs and a bunch of other things so that they can make ends meet. And he of course points out that a ping pong table, he couldn't think of a way to honestly justify it to the board. He openly admits that he would never be able to find a way to justify it to them. So for that reason, he's just decided that he's not going to buy them one, and then insists that they get out of his office, and they then proceed to leave. However, that night, Mr. Servants does start thinking things through. He starts sitting as he gets home. He then proceeds to kind of reminisce about and then proceeds to go to his garage, where we find out that he has a box very specifically labeled for reminiscing purposes only. And he proceeds to pull out a picture of his father and a ping pong paddle, and we find out that they used to play ping pong together, and obviously they don't do that anymore. So of course the next day he comes to Terry and Corvo and asks them to come with him, and of course they think they're in trouble. The way his tone of voice suggests that they might be in trouble, but then he reveals that he actually thought a lot about what they said, and then brings them down to the boiler room, where it's revealed that he did in fact buy their ping pong table. And of course they're wondering, they're confused as to how he was able to afford this, pointing out that obviously he mentioned that he was gonna do a bunch of cost-cutting things. Obviously, that's not gonna. Obviously, he had to do a bunch of cost-cutting things. He admitted he couldn't buy the ping pong table, let alone justify it to the board of directors. But he then proceeds to point out that he knows exactly what he can say to the board. He knows exactly how to rationalize it, and that they shouldn't worry about it. And they do admit that he is the best boss ever, and that they're very lucky to work with him. And he admits that he's lucky he has them as employees because they're easy to work with. But of course, and this is where he said it was a bit of foreshadowing. As Mr. Servants is diving for a ping pong ball, he winds up getting impaled on a broken pipe and dies. And of course, they realize, and Terry and Corvo quickly realize that what he said was true. It was dangerous in the boiler room, and now somebody's dead. So of course, Terry and Corvo then need to figure out how they can actually, honest to God, save him and keep him, and figure out both how to save the ping pong table, but also figure out what they're supposed to do, since obviously they just accidentally killed their boss. They're not entirely sure how to deal with that, so they bring him back to the Pretendo deck on the ship, and I talked to Aisha about it, and Aisha is of course visibly confused why there's a dead man in her Pretendo deck, but then understands the situation and offers that they use a bit of sci-fi to fix it. And of course, Corvo is obviously skeptical about the idea of using sci-fi, pointing out that obviously the entire point of why they got office jobs is to give the people more structure, and that means no sci-fi. But Aisha points out that it won't really affect the pupil's development if they use the occasional sci-fi here or there. So they give them a jar of revival pellets, which is designed to bring anybody who eats them back to life. And of course, they proceed to give Mr. Servants a pellet, and then proceed to wonder for a few minutes if it worked, because it doesn't seem like it's working. At which point he proceeds to wake up and become revived, and Corvo panics and shoots him, and then they have to use another one. So, which is a funny gag. But in case, they then proceed to bring Mr. Servants back to the office after reviving him, but what we find out is that Mr. Servants is a little, well, let's just say, coming back to life has had a very interesting effect on Mr. Servant's mind. Obviously, he's very confused about why he's alive, and is also seeing the afterlife. He knows what awaits them in the great beyond, and has driven him a little bit crazy. So, and of course, Corvo is busy trying to rehabilitate Mr. Servant to figure out how to bring him back to life. Well, actually, figure out how to jog his memory so that he can justify their ping pong table. And of course, there's also pointing out that obviously nobody should care about the obvious revelation that obviously you should not. Obviously, the entire problem with this is that the afterlife nobody is really sure exists. So obviously it's a very funny gag that he comes back to life and obviously knows that the afterlife exists now, and is very confused why he's been brought back from the afterlife and is returned to the moral coil. He is not coping with it, like at all. And of course, this is this point where of course Terry walks in and realizes Corvo is struggling a little bit to figure out what to do with Mr. Servants and how to jog his memory and remind him of what he was supposed to be talking about before he died and came back twice. At which point Terry realizes that he needs to filibuster and stall for time until Corvo can get everything with Mr. Servant sorted out. So he proceeds to go into the room with the board of directors, and they obviously are a little confused as to why he's there and why Mr. Servants isn't there giving his presentation about the budget cuts and why there were supposed to be budget cuts. And so Terry proceeds to give a very panicked filibuster about what rakes are and why they use them. And of course he goes on a bit of a tangent about how rakes are clearly just combs for lawns, and of course one of the board of directors points out that he's obviously a little nuts, and points out that he shouldn't that obviously he's clearly making this up because he doesn't really have a plan. But then Terry proceeds to quote unquote brush his hair with the rake, which causes them all to immediately like him because they realize that they were being a little bit too stressed. At which point, Corvo finally walks in with Mr. Servants, who obviously is still not dealing with the idea that he's been brought back from the afterlife. And of course, they then proceed the board of directors notes that he's acting a little squirrely and acting a little weird. but they do proceed to continue on with their audit nonetheless. And then proceed to point out that they obviously told them that he obviously told them that he was going to do some budget cuts, but now he's brought in a swimming pool, brought in a ping pong table and wants to how we justify that. At which point, Mr. Servants then proceeds to climb onto the table, saying that they have all come from light, and from light they will return. And proceeds to run and jump out of what I believe is the 7th-story window of their office, and dies a 3rd time. And of course, Corvo realizes that he really should have brought more of those pellets, but is at this point where they proceed to point out that of course the board of directors proceeds to start talking with the police, and Terry and Corvo are worried that they may be in trouble for accidentally killing their boss 3 separate times. But eventually the board of directors comes to them and tells them that the police are gone, and that they told the police that that obviously the stress of working at Davenport Rakes as a branch manager is what caused Mr. Servants to ultimately snap and take his own life. And of course, Corvo does agree wholeheartedly with that decision, pointing out that obviously they believe that Mr. Servant, he agrees that they believe Mr. Servants was weak, and that there was absolutely no sci-fi or aliens involved or in any sort of capacity, which of course they acknowledge as well. But they then proceed to point out that now that Mr. Servants is obviously past for real this time, they're going to need somebody to replace him. And at which point, and of course, it's at this point where they decide to give the promotion. And Corvo, of course, immediately volunteers, because it's established in the episode that this is something he's wanted for a while. He's wanted to be the new boss. But of course, they then proceed to completely pass over Corvo for the promotion and give it to Terry. And Terry is very excited to be the new boss and tells him that he won't let them down. But then also it becomes apparent that the power has immediately gone to Terry's head. And he is just kind of gone a little bit off the deep end with it. Obviously, Corvo admits that he wants to go with him, because obviously he was he feels partly responsible for the entire thing, and also admits that this was a promotion he wanted. But Terry proceeds to tell him that to stay at his desk, because that's his job, and as his boss, he can order him to do that now. And of course, Terry proceeds to go into the office exclaiming about how he likes being the boss. And that, of course, is the A plot. Now it's time for the B plot, where shortly after Corvo made the replicants lunch and to bring with them, we find out a little bit more about their anatomy, about how replicants exchange information and nutrients and other things through their elbows, which of course means that they've locked elbows and have started doing that. Of course they're made fun of by the Stacys, who point out that that's a little bit weird, and that obviously and wonders if they're hugging like their boyfriend and girlfriend. But of course they proceed to explain very matter-of-factly what they're doing. They're exchanging information and protein and other things that they need, and they do that through their elbows. And of course it's at this point where the Stacys proceed to label that as quote-unquote elbow sex, and proceed to and are prepared to just kind of and because they're the popular girls in school, they proceed to just tell everybody that this is a thing that the replicants do, which of course they realize is a problem. But and of course Jesse and Yumulak proceed to get on the bus, at which point they realize that they probably should lay low. But it's of course where Yumulak proceeds to point out that they should probably stop hanging out entirely, because Yumulak has realized that this entire rumor about having quote unquote elbow sex is obviously going to continue to spread like wildfire, and it's going to continue to be a problem. And of course Jesse points out that that's probably for the best, but also wonders that they can still hang out. But of course by this point Yumulak has already moved all the way to the back of the bus and is nowhere where Jesse was going to sit down. So she just sits down at the front of the bus, and from that point onward, they start having problems. So, of course, it's at this point where they realize where the Stacys have since asked Jesse to sit with them at lunch, because they saw what happens between her and Yumulak, and realize that obviously that is going to, and that obviously means that obviously the whole issue about sticking it to her brother is what makes her cool. And they then proceed to admit that they should really consider pranking her brother to kind of get back at her for not hanging out with him. And of course, they wonder why they would do something like that. But they also point out that the Stacys proceed to point out that that's just exactly what the kind of thing that they do. And they proceed to explain all of the horrible things they've done to their brothers. About how one got framed for possessing drugs, another no longer is allowed to show his face at school. He was forced to move in with his grandmother because he got blacklisted so hard. And the third one I forget, but it was terrible too. But in case after hearing all that, she quickly realizes that it'll probably be fine, that they're right, and that she'll find a way to get back at her brother, quote unquote brother, for basically deserting her, pointing out that it would be a great idea to embarrass him in front of all his friends, but also points out that he probably doesn't have many friends to embarrass in front of him as a joke. At which point we found out that Yumulak has actually found a new group of friends. As we find out, Yumulak has started palling around with the teachers in the teachers' lounge, and this is apparently as a result of him helping out Principal Cook in the previous season and them being on better terms. But obviously, Principal Cook apparently told the rest of the teachers that Yumulak is cool because he's just hanging out and sharing inside secrets with the rest of the teachers about how sometimes they just hang around in the teachers' lounge making fun of the slower students, and that they were planning to put a movie on in the last period and go and dip out early. And Yumulak admits that he's in and that he'll be more than happy to hang out. But in case at this point where Jesse proceeds to walk into the ship to look for what we find out is a quote unquote dick ray, which I'm just gonna explain that. It's essentially what it sounds like. It just covers whoever gets shot by it in penises. That's essentially what it is. Like, I don't think I need to clarify that. That you should probably figure out exactly. That's exactly what it does. But in case she admits that that's the entire plan of what she plans to do, and that she's planning to bring the gun to school and zap Yumulak with it by bringing him up in front of everybody and embarrassing him in front of the entire school. But of course, Aisha proceeds to tell her that that's a really bad idea because, as she explains, they're quote unquote they're the little protein ports that they use to exchange proteins and information. Is obviously she explains that the way they work is that it's built on mutual trust between two replicants, and that when the replicants stop trusting each other, they close pretty much forever. Like the way the analogy Aisha uses is like earring holes. If you stop putting earrings in them, they eventually close up and stop being used for earrings. And of course, Jessie starts to admit that she's probably right. But it's at this point where she finds out that the teachers have brought Yumulak and they are currently mooning her from their car, and are also driving circles around on the lawn. Which of course Jessie realizes is more than worth it to make Yumulak make fun, and points out that he's getting off easy, that she realizes they're letting her off, that he's letting him off too easy. At which point she proceeds to grab Aisha proceeds to give her the dick ray, and of course the people proceeds to just look at Aisha, but Aisha just shrugs quote unquote because she's just a little orb. A little floating computer orb that she uses to communicate from the ship, but she shrugs, so to speak, and points out that they're a team, and that it's kind of important that they make some sort of mistake. At which point it's at this point where the Stacys then proceed to run through the plan about how they have nominated Yumulak for an award, and when he goes up to receive said award, that's when he's going to get zapped by the dick ray. But and of course, exactly. Corvo, and before we find out, Yumulak has been nominated for Most Improved, but also there's a couple of other funny ones, including, as we find out, there's an undercover detective currently at the school, and he gets a reward for quote unquote most likely to be a narc, which is funny. But of course, they then proceed to bring of course, it's at this point where Yumulak is about to walk up onto stage to get his reward for Most Improved. And of course, we find out that she is about to zap Yumulak with the ray. But it's at this point where the pupa proceeds to show up, and it's revealed that he has his own little information thing where he connects to Jesse, and we then find out Jesse and Yumulak's backstory about how they were both cut from Terra and Corvo's fingers. We find that out, and but what we find out is that they didn't quite grow all that healthily. And like they were like in the nursery, every other replicant was separate, and their little tree sprout was not growing in, and were growing in perfectly fine. Jesse and Yumulak's was not. And what we find out is that in order to solve that, the pupa cultivator, or as I'm going, the replicant cultivator, as I'm going to call them, the replicant cultivators decided that the best way to do that was to grow the two of them together so that they would grow healthy together. And of course, it's at this point where Jesse realizes that the two of them have always had each other's backs, and decides not to go through that she can't go through with zapping Yumulak. At which point, one of the Stacys decides to steal the gun from her to do it herself. At which point Jesse shoves her down to keep her from actually zapping Yumulak with it. And the raid then proceeds to bounce around the auditorium and hits one of the Stacys, and she proceeds to run out of the gymnasium crying. And of course, the other two Stacys do go on to console her, might I mention. And Yumulak is a little confused, wondering what exactly it is all of that was about. And she then proceeds to explain exactly what happened. She was going to zap him with the quote-unquote dick ray, but then realized that didn't feel right because they've always had each other's back, and that they've always trusted each other. And of course, Yumulak points out that was very sweet. That's very sweet, and he realizes that obviously he's glad to have her back as well. But it's at this point where Jesse gets called up for having the best bow as an award, and Yumulak proceeds to shove her out of the way because he reveals that they actually put an Ewok log trap to crush her head, which of course is dangerous. That shouldn't have been done, but he proceeds to go on to explain how they put one of those in because obviously it would be very dangerous for them to do that, and he proceeds to point out that she would have been killed if they'd gone through with it, and that it was ultimately the teacher's idea. And Jesse is happy that Yumulak saved her in turn, and that makes them finally reconcile. While the teachers are just annoyed that Yumulak didn't go through it, but unfortunately, another kid, unrelated to what they were doing, wound up dying to the log trap instead, which is unfortunately how the episode ends. And of course, it's at this point where Jesse and Yumulak proceed to reconcile, using their protein things to exchange information and proteins. And they point out that they don't really care what anybody else thinks. This is their normal. This is something they do. That's considered normal to them. If nobody likes it, they can kiss their ass. And that is how the episode ends. So first and foremost, obviously Dan Stevens voices Corvo now. That's the big thing. But also, Cherry is now the boss at Davenport Rakes, while Corvo is not. And obviously that's got to be the big shakeup for the season. About that Terry obviously got the promotion that Corvo wanted, and that is most likely going to cause stress for the rest of the season. But also, and then honestly, that's just really the only major thing going forward. Obviously, we find a little bit more about the replicants and how they were created, and also how they've always had each other's back because they literally grew together. They were literally cultivated together as seedlings, and grew up from the same pot. They have been together literally since before they were born. So. Or grown, whatever the point is, they've been together since forever. So that is kind of the point I'm trying to make. They've been together for the longest time. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review, and also kind of a little bit more of the context about why Corvo had his voice changed. Because that's the big thing I wanted to cover in this episode as well. But in any case, if you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below, down below in the comments. Go do that. Go check out my Discord, because that's where I'm trying to migrate people to. Please go do that. Be sure to go and check out Discord as well. Just go check out Discord in general. Just go do that. I would appreciate that. And also be sure to go check out Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check that out. I would appreciate that. Go and check, and also finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So most likely more solar opposites or either more solar opposites or more high on life, which is another thing I've reviewed that also featured Justin Roiland, but not anymore. That's another thing I've done that's another series I've done on YouTube. If you want to see that, by all means, go check either of those out. Link again. The videos will probably lead you to that. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.